to welcome you back to our third and final installment of our small business seminar series that we're hosting with the Howard County Economic Development Authority, as well as with County Executive Dr. Calvin Ball. And so we have had truly 3 weeks of just a lot of valuable information and insights as it relates to navigating this COVID-19 crisis for business in particular. And as we end up, talking about how do we shift our businesses, how do we further encourage our employees and so forth. And so with that, I'm going to actually turn things over to my partner in business, and Larry Twill, who's the president of the Howard County Economic Development Authority, who will bring some remarks as well as introduce some comments, a video from our county executive. So, Larry.
Thanks, Leonardo. Can you guys hear me? Looking good. Great. Yeah, thanks for hosting this with us, and the county executive, delivering this kind of content to our small business community is key, especially during these times. And it's been a great couple of sessions so far. This has been, the first 2 sessions delivered a lot of good information about financing, banking relationships, good stories from our keynote speakers. And, it just really is the face of small business and, the resources that are available here in this county. We're very pleased to, be able to support the county executive's initiative on this. He realizes that the backbone of Howard County's, business community and local economy is our small businesses. And, it's just I think, this is a unique county in that, working so closely with the county executive and the chamber and, the resources that we can bring to our small business owners and entrepreneurs. So I'd like to introduce a short video message from our county executive.
Good morning and welcome to the Small Business Seminar Series. Thank you to the Chamber of Commerce and EDA for this collaboration. As you know, the last several months have been a challenging time for our businesses. The long-term economic impact of the coronavirus pandemic is still unclear. But there is no doubt that we have entered a prolonged period of change. One of the ways out of this crisis is to embrace resilience thinking as an essential part of business strategy going forward. Resilience is a core competency in all successful businesses and is crucial to achieving and maintaining competitive advantage. Resilience comes from being robust, having strong enough plans, processes, people, and supply chains to withstand varied and significant stresses and shocks. And adaptable, being able to flexibly change those systems and approaches in response to new circumstances or information. As we emerge from the pandemic, it's crucial to place resilience at the heart of all business continuity planning. This seminar will frame the resilience discussion around workplace culture, data security, and disaster preparation and procurement and supply chain. Thank you for attending.
Good. I'd like to thank the county executive for taking the time to film that for us. We've learned nothing in these past several, not only this year, but these past several years with Ellicott City floods and building explosions. It is the need to be resilient, and today's a good portion of today's agenda will focus on that. But in addition, we're also going to talk about procurement and how you can access opportunities at the county level. So with that, I'd like to turn it back over to my partner, Leonardo. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Chuck Phillips from KCI Technologies. And KCI has been our premier sponsor for our series. And Chuck is the current chair of the Howard County Chamber Board of Directors. And he's also a member of the Board of Directors for the Howard County Economic Development Authority as well. And so, Chuck.
Thanks so much, Leonardo. I can tell you KCI is very pleased to sponsor this small business seminar series. For those of you not familiar with KCI, we're a 100% employee-owned engineering, planning, and construction company with a core purpose to care for and improve the built and natural environment to better serve our society. The company was founded as a small business in a row home on Charles Street in Baltimore back in 1955. Today, our 2,000 employee owners service clients around the country from 60 offices in 20 states. We're still headquartered here in Maryland and have had a long-term presence in Howard County. And for the last 10 years, we've been located in the outstanding Maple Lawn mixed-use development down in Fulton, Maryland. At KCI, we have a deep understanding of the importance of small business to our economy and to our communities. We're committed to supporting small business by partnering with them on projects and by mentoring them through programs like the Veterans Administration Mentor Protege Program. And we currently have 2 small businesses that we're sponsoring through that program. We thank you for your attendance at this series and hope you gain key insights and takeaways that help you look for ways for your small business to grow and thrive, even in these current very challenging economic conditions. And with that, let's get on to the program for today.
Thank you, Chuck. And so it is my pleasure now to move us into our first session, which is on, again, talking about resiliency, but particularly as it relates to our workforce and how we can continue to be supportive of our employees and our team members. And so it is my pleasure to introduce to you Nat Alston, as well as also Sal Schettino. And so just a little bit about the two of them. So Nat Alston is the president and founder of the Horizons Group, Incorporated. He has over 40 years of middle and executive level human resource experience in a variety of industries. He is currently the chairman for the National Association of African Americans in Human Resources. He is also a developer, mentor, recruiter, visionary leader, entrepreneur, motivational speaker, and contributing writer to LOVE, which is an acronym, but LOVE is the Answer movement book. And so again, and also not mentioned here, Nat is very active in Howard County and serves on the county's EBOC, which is the Equal Business Opportunity Commission. And so he's very passionate about small business and particularly small business opportunities for women and minority groups. And so Nat, thank you for joining us this morning. Next, we have Sal Schettino. And Sal is a licensed psychotherapist and growth and success consultant. His vision is to educate people on how to divorce the hold of self-limiting beliefs, capabilities, and marry a newfound truth of one's unlimited capacity for growth. By combination of expertise in licensing, he accumulated strategies and skills derived from evidence-based therapeutic modalities such as cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy, and exposure therapy. And so again, it is my pleasure now to turn things over to both Sal and to Nat Alston.
Okay, thank you very much, Leonardo, and thank you, Larry, and thank you for the Howard County Chamber and the Howard County Economic Development for having this particular summit on small business development and workplace development and workplace resiliency. I'm going to go to my screen now so we can share that screen. I hope we can do that. If you give me a second here.
I want to piggyback off of that and just say thank you all for the warm welcome and thanks for everyone joining. I think this is a crucial and instrumental need-based conversation for the times that we have found ourselves in. So thank you everyone for attending.
Okay. I'm hoping that people can see this since we're looking at sharing the screen.
You're good.
Okay, great, great. Well, one of the things that the county executive talked about with the pandemic and also COVID-19 has forced many companies to change their ways of thinking. It's been about 8 to 10 months now in. And as I put up here on the screen, as organizations continue to journey toward the new normal, and I've emphasized the new normal, here's some things that basically I think you may want to keep in mind. There's a new term out there now called experience management. And this is going to be the key for businesses to really transition back into the business that they're in, but also keeping in mind, as I stated earlier, this business is going to be totally different now for quite some time, if probably forever, going into the 21st century and now 2021. So you're going to see this term probably a lot more as you go into business now in terms of experience management. And by that, I mean, we're looking at now some phases that basically people, businesses, and cultures will look at as they cross into these new markets, as I stated earlier. And I'm skipping, please forgive me. Okay, this is what I pulled out really in talking to the people at the XM Institute in here. The experience management now going forward is going to focus on, as I see it, 4 different areas. And as the county executive mentioned, and as we've been talking about in terms of small businesses, you got to really now focus on your customers more than ever. I'm seeing now more and more companies, small and medium-sized companies, doing more and more customer service surveys. So they really want to make sure that they're addressing the needs and concerns now that people are staying at home and working from home. How do we now take care of those employees? How do we track those employees? Because it's a new model. So new customers rather. The other piece in there is the employee experience, making those employees feeling a lot more comfortable now that they're working from home. And Sal will get into that a little bit more in terms of his presentation, but employees staying home now, the stresses of those issues now staying at home, childcare, schools going to a virtual platform, working from remote with all the needs and stresses that are there. You as an employer have got to look at a lot more now as it relates to that employee experience. And these phases really cover that. Are you listening more to your employees now, finding out really what they're thinking, what they're feeling, and how can you now engage them even more, and really putting a lot more emphasis on those employees so they really have what I would call an engaging experience. So the first 2 are really very, very important, the customer and the employees. I'm reminded of a time when I was with a large hospitality company. We would always use a cliche, and the cliche is more and more important now. Managers, take care of your employees, the employees will take care of the customers. So you sincerely really have to now engage and take care of your employees, particularly as they transition back into this new normal. And as you see there, those phases, explore, reorient, and normalize. Well, that normalization now is going to be under a whole new model. The other key point is your brand, the brand experience. Tracking now the perception of how your brand is going to be perceived now. We've seen a lot of brands come and go, and now with social media and people working from home, that brand basically now needs to be more and more prioritized, engaging the employees and getting their knowledge and their experiences in there. And then later, you're seeing the product. What are you basically servicing, or what's your product out there? So you're seeing now 4 different categories as we navigate now in order for you to be far more resilient, and in the sense of being resilient, more and more positive as you go forward. The customer experience, the employee experience, the brand, and the product. So again, keep skipping to these previous pages. These early stages, as I sit here, is going to be more trial and error and learning, because here again, this is a new normal. And you need to maintain quick cycles of sensing and adapting early on, while holding back on locking onto a long-term objective or direction until ongoing patterns and behaviors, I didn't include that in there, emerge and persist. So again, these stages you're going to end up learning. And as I see said up there in the top, practice intentional patience. We've got to be patient with our employees as they transition into this new normal. And we as managers or owners of our companies, if we're working with those employees, you've got to give them time to adjust. The other piece that we're looking at too is capitalize on persistent changes. Changes are hard. And as you see here now, we've got opportunities that's going to disrupt the competitive environment. And you've got to tap into those new behaviors and attitudes that persist beyond the crisis. And that's what I'm saying before. You're going to have areas for innovation, but there will be likely others as well. Make sure that you track the attitudes and behavior of your customers and not just attempting to return to the new normal, or I'm sorry, the good old days. So I put a lot of emphasis really on tracking the attitudes and behaviors of your customers and particularly your employees. It is not going to be the good old days anymore. That new normal is still being developed, still being formulated out there. So more and more that you are in tune with your employees and your customers, that's going to be the one or the other that's going to include and help you to move to the next level. So I stated earlier, tap into engage employees. Having that strategic plan, absolutely. But you also want to, with that plan, tap into the insights and energy of your employees, especially as I stated here, the early stages. Your employees' eyes and ears about what's working and what needs to be changed, you need to be listening to. If they're not engaged, then they will never make the changes that you need to have in a pace that's required in your market. So what I'm saying in that, again, your people, your employees, you got to listen more, find out what they're sensing and working with their employees and their customers so you can adapt and change to that next level. Again, that employee experience got to be action oriented. This is a year, what I've set down here for insightful actions. Even before it was clear that organizations were most successful when that employee experience focused on driving improvements and making better decisions. That's the direction that we need to go. I put down here questions. What have you learned? And what improvements are you making? During this pandemic, you've learned a lot. Hopefully you have. I've used the term with my clients out there, have you been able to pivot? And if you have learned that and you've got to pivot, what improvements are you going to start making now to come out of this, be far more resilient and far more robust? So keep in mind, employee management has to be action oriented. So really finishing, so Sal can come right back in. My takeaways on this is going to be this. One, back to work will not be back to normal. I've said this in the past. These last 8 to 10 months has created a whole new normal. The digital platform, we're finding that more and more companies now have decided to make sure that their employees are working from home, and that's going to be probably going into 2021. And if we look at habits and behavior, after a while, if I'm home working from home for 12 months, guess what? That becomes now the new normal. And it also puts a great deal of more emphasis on management and how do I now manage that person who's working remote. Also, in terms of your workforce, you've got to be a little bit more agile. That job description that you have now is going to change. The person that you hire is going to have to be able to be a lot more flexible, a lot more engaging. He or she is going to have a lot more concept, or shall we say, engage with the employees, his fellow employees, and with the new customers that you may be receiving. The third one, process overhaul, spells a culture change. Whatever your culture was in the past, let's say before February, before March, that is in the process of changing now. It's going to change the culture going forward. It's also going to change the employees that you have, that you hire, and your existing employees have to adapt. And you got to be careful in making sure that they are agile and that they can be willing to change, because change can be very stressful, as Sal will probably mention a little bit later. Puts a lot of stress on employees. So understand, change is going to be something that's going to happen as you go forward. And last but not least, and I think the thread has basically been indicated all the way through this, people management will be very, very important. If I can't stress anything else, I've said, as far as my company, we're human capital. Human beings, people are going to be extremely important as you go forward. They're going to be able to take your company to heights that probably you never experienced. Or if you don't have that agile workforce, they could probably cripple your particular business and your brand and your customers. So people management, I will share with, say, not so much share, but tell our managers and our owners, you've got to develop now more people management skills. The technical skills are there, but the people management skills are going to be extremely important as you go forward. So those are the 4 takeaways when I look at resiliency, that new normal, an agile workforce, culture change, and people management. So those are the ones that we say that you should keep in mind. So thank you very much. And I'll turn it over to Sal. And again, thank you.
Great information, Nat. Nat, will you be pulling up my PowerPoint?
Let's see. Let me pull that up real quick.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So I'll do a little quick introduction for everyone while you're doing that.
Sure.
Good morning, guys. My name is Sal Scatino. I'm a licensed psychotherapist and success and growth consultant and public speaker at a private practice in both Millersville and Catonsville, Maryland. And so what I want to discuss with you guys today is how do we develop and maintain resiliency on both the cognitive and the emotional level, right? We've all found ourselves in the midst of drastic change. So I want to show you what happens on the cognitive level, meaning the thoughts, perceptions, and beliefs, and then both the emotional level as well, in kind of tandem with that, so that we have a better understanding of what's going on underneath the surface with ourselves, with our employees, our loved ones, and everyone around us in our circle of influence. So once we develop that intel, we're going to be able to better understand what's happening in those moments, so that it can reduce the onset of fear and create more of an educational piece as to how to better navigate through these circumstances and situations. And I'll go into different ways of distress tolerance. How do we cope and manage in those high levels of distress? All right. So while he's still working on pulling up my PowerPoint, I want to ask you guys a few questions. And I want you to sit on the answers to these questions, because it's going to be useful information for carrying along through my talk. And I want you to apply the different strategies and skills that I'm going to present with you to these different situations from the answers to the questions that I'm going to present right now. So if you guys could all give me your listening ears real quick.
Do you have it, Sal?
Sorry?
Do you have your PowerPoint up?
I do have my PowerPoint.
Okay, you got it.
Okay, so I will, can someone allow me to share my screen?
I'm sorry, Sal, you have it.
Oh,
You have it. Meaning you have the ability to share.
Oh, okay, great. All right, wonderful. All right, let's just do this real quick. Beautiful. Okay, back on track. So I want you guys to kind of sit on the answers to these questions real quick. So who here has had a setback which had led them to kind of overthink their decision in the moment? Right, those cycling thoughts. Good. Now, who here has made a mistake to the extent that you questioned your capability and your competence, saying, am I capable? Can I do this? Good. Lastly, who here has experienced a trauma, a setback, a massive failure, or a life change that has led them to question their sense of self, who they are, their identity? Good. I want you guys to kind of allow those answers and those situations and experiences that we've all been through to resonate during my talk, so we can apply the different things that I'm talking about to those circumstances. All right, let's hop right into it. So first, I want to educate and share with you how our brain assesses stress. So when something comes into our environment, we have an emotional response to it. And our emotions is basically, it tells us how to manage this threat or reward that's happening in our environment and everything in between. So what do we do about it? It's kind of our cue or our prompt to know what to do moving forward. So when high levels of stress, drastic changes, COVID, right, loss of employees, or you lose clients, and there's a massive shift in your company, what your brain's going to do is it's going to funnel itself into one of three categories. One, responsibility and defectiveness. That's saying, I did something wrong. I'm the problem. I'm the issue here. Next is safety and vulnerability, right? Am I in danger? The finances in danger? Is the business in danger of continuing to move forward? And lastly, power and control. Do I feel helpless? Do I feel hopeless? Do I feel like I have no avenue or pathway to turn to at this moment, and all my resources are depleted? So that's going to be good information to know what's happening in those moments so that we can better catch those times and maneuver and pivot to other different ways of thinking. So next, how do we behaviorally respond to high levels of stress? One, and this is all from research, evidence-based information that I've given, that I've been received and that I've studied in the past. So normal human beings, when we are presented with a high levels of stress or a stressor in our environment, we do one of four things. One, we're going to try to avoid, right? Our brain usually takes the path of least resistance. So it says, how do I get away from this stressor? But what I've come to understand about that, I'm sure you've all experienced this at some point as well, is say you have an argument with your boss or an employee at work. And in that moment, you try to avoid confronting the emotion you're feeling in it, because for fear of being the emotion and acting off the emotion. So you suppress it, you push it down. And then you get home and you have a conversation with, wife, kids, and they irritate you, and you displace and project that emotional suppression that was placed there earlier, right? That is a normal part of our human condition, but that is something that is no longer beneficial from what we've learned, and it's damaging to relationships. Next, rumination. So this is where we get stuck on those cycling thoughts. We're perseverating, right? We're kind of playing this movie reel over and over and over again, and we feel like there's no escape. Also, emotion-driven behaviors. So this is where our brain no longer can think rationally or logically. It's stuck in the amygdala, which is the emotion and fear center of the brain. And the brain cannot operate in two areas at one time. So when it's in the emotion center, what we need to do is find a way to take a step back and detach. But what it does is, if we try to make a decision while the emotion is exacerbated in high levels, we are going to make that decision based off of the emotion and not logic. And lastly, urge surfing. And this is something that I share with my clients on a consistent basis. This is something we've got to be more, cognizant of and aware of and conscious of. In that, when an emotion comes on, science tells us, that it takes 10 to 15 minutes for adrenaline to reabsorb back into the body. So what that means is that after that 10, 15 minutes, get some water. our body will calm itself down. It'll downregulate our central nervous system and we'll be able to relax. So it's really just figuring out a way to ride out the emotion. Try not to fight it, try not to change it, just accept the onset of it. All right. Excuse me. So now how do we take the information we just learned about how the brain and the body deals with stress and figure out different ways to maneuver and to navigate through those periods? All right, this can help you, while you're at work, while you're out in the field, getting clients, while you're at home with a loved one, and you have that heightened visceral emotional response. Try one of these tactics. Once I explain it and you guys get an idea and a feel for it, play with which one's going to work best for you, and use the answers to the questions that I presented earlier as a way to kind of incorporate these things and just envision what it would be like. So improve the moment is an acronym from dialectical behavioral therapy. And the whole purpose and reason for dialectical behavioral therapy is finding the balance in our high levels of emotional states. So it's like we are the pendulum, right? In the pandemic, the onset of the pandemic caused a drastic swing in the direction of uncertainty, fear, and panic, right? And once we kind of found our footing, we're able to kind of come back to center. But sometimes it'll go to the other side and say, all right, I want to avoid it completely, not even deal with it. So this is ways to find that balance yet again. So the first one is imagery. So our brain cannot tell the difference between imagination and reality. Let's play off of that, use that information. And the way in which we do that is by tapping into our five senses, right? In those moments where your body is responding heavily and your heart rate is high and your hands are shaking and you're sweating and you're just so overwhelmed and absorbed with emotion, notice what's happening in your environment. Play off of what you can see, what you can hear, what you can smell, what you can taste, and what you can feel. And that's going to create a detachment from you and the emotion, and it's going to calm down your body. Next, look at what the meaning your brain is focusing on. What are you devoting your attention and energy towards? Right? A lot of times we're focusing on what we can't do about the situation. We're fixating and perseverating on these things that we have no control over. Right? Say the boss yells at you and you're in that emotional state and you want to yell back and you want to lash out, but that's not going to benefit you in any way. So what we want to do is find a different way to pull meaning from it. So say, okay, what did the boss say? She said, I have to do X, Y, Z in order to improve productivity. So you focus on X, Y, Z. How do I implement that into my decision-making moving forward, or to dealing with these situations differently for future reference? Next, prayer. Now, this doesn't mean you have to have a higher power, you have to believe in God. But what this stipulates is that research has told us when you have something greater than yourself that you use as a support system when you can't support yourself, it's very beneficial to the body's distress system, right? When we're in fight or flight and we're able to take a moment and to share responsibility of our distress with something greater than us, it creates such a relief and a kind of just a rescind of anger and frustration or whatever emotional response that you're dealing with in the moment. Next, relaxation techniques. Now, I hope we all have one of these, especially for anyone that is driven, ambitious, and has big work schedules that you're trying to get a lot done and you want to succeed on a high platform. And I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here, I imagine. But knowing what is beneficial to you, and if that works, great, keep it. If not, discard it and add something new. So like deep breathing is very useful. Right? Counting back from 10 when you're extremely upset is going to be helpful to relaxing the body. Taking a warm bath, drinking a warm beverage. Right? Research actually did this cool little study where they had subjects. They had two groups of subjects. One drank tea or coffee, a warm beverage, before meeting the experimenter, and the other one did not. And when both groups were asked, hey, who was more welcoming and comfortable? The group that had the warm beverage said this experimenter was more warm and welcoming. It's because their body was settled down from that warm beverage. It calmed itself. So knowing what works in those situations. One thing at a time. This is going to be instrumental for all of you. Anyone in the business field or sector that works hard and has a big to-do list. right? The brain gets too overwhelmed when it sees too many things at one time, right? Because it imagines itself dealing with all those things in that very moment. That's too much. That's stress overload, right? You're out of your comfort zone. You're out of your zone of proximal distance, we call it, meaning zone of capability. So what we want to do is we want to focus our attention on the one thing at a time, right? Can't build a wall in a day, but you can lay that brick as best as possible. It's like the other day I had 12 clients, and it's very daunting when I think about having all 12 clients and how do I help them manage and cope and build resiliency and grow from their distress, or figure out how to better handle their emotions and all these different things. But if I just focus on one client at a time, it's more manageable. I get more work done, and my focus and energy is towards something that I can do something about. All right, next, vacation. Now, this doesn't mean you got to take some elaborate vacation to the Amalfi Coast, right? To Greece or whatever. What this means is move your physical body, your physical environment. Get out of that for a moment so that your brain can detach and take a break. Right? Break is great for productivity. It's great for creativity as well. And this doesn't mean scrolling on your phone, because that's still having your brain in high levels of stimulation. That's not calming it down. That's just speeding it up in a different platform, in a different way. So that's not going to relax you, or that's not going to allow you to decompress or take a step back. And also, when you take this break, maybe like a walk, what it does, it creates bilateral stimulation in the brain, meaning it's going to activate both hemispheres of the brain while you're walking, meaning you're kind of playing its attentional field on both left and right sides of the brain. So that allows you to expedite the processing, meaning overcome and speed up your growth and development through emotional distress. And lastly, encouragement, right? How do you speak to yourself? How do you speak to your clients? How do you speak to your employees? Is it the relationship of tyrant to slave, or is it employer to trusted employee? Right? Evolution tells us that if you speak to yourself or anyone else in your environment from tyrant to slave, the slave will rebel. They don't like to be treated poorly or in a maleficent way. So they're going to say, I don't want to do that, or they'll only do the bare minimum, and they'll end up creating a learned helplessness and just give up. But if you go from trusted employer to trusted employee, you're going to encourage that person. You're going to allow them to kind of create an open mindset as to find other possibilities to said problem. And then you're going to encourage that. You're going to praise the hard work and say, what can we do differently next time? You're a supportive entity, not a demonizing or condemning entity. Okay. So now, how do we build resiliency, right? This is the whole point of the talk today. So I hope we're still holding those experiences in our mind that were brought to the surface from the questions that I asked earlier, because I want us to keep applying that to each strategy and each concept that I'm sharing with you today. So now, how do we bring this all into fruition, right? What is it going to allow us to have resiliency and growth moving forward from certain situations or setbacks? One, emotional labeling and acceptance. Right? If you can name your emotion, you can tame your emotion. It's going to create distance between you and the emotion, saying it's not who I am, it's just what I'm experiencing. We all experience emotions. Emotions are a very positive and beneficial thing to our evolution and to our growth, because it tells us what's happening in our environment, how to assess that experience or that situation. You want to make use of it, but we've just got to be more aware, more mindful as to what's happening, and accepting that it is happening, not trying to avoid, detract, or distract from its onset, right? It's real. It's real on the bodily level, but it's not always real on the rational or experiential level, meaning happening in real life. Next, creating an open-minded approach, right? Say we make a drastic mistake. We all have. I remember in the beginning of my therapeutic career, and when I was trying to build clientele and I'm speaking to everyone and everything, and I'm just wearing myself thin, I'd make a lot of mistakes because my attention and focus was everywhere. And when I make that mistake, I'd fixate on the mistake and say that I was the problem. I was doing something wildly wrong. But in those moments, what's beneficial for us is taking that step back, identifying your emotion. Yes, name it, accept it. But then looking at other possibilities to said problem is going to be monumental in this moment. It's going to create an abundance mindset for us. Right? Next, recall strengths and monitor progress after the fact, after the failure or the setback. If you monitor your strengths, if you identify on a daily basis what you're doing well, what that's going to do is give you motivational footing, right? It's going to tell you that you're working for something and for someone that you believe in, right? It's just like when you believe in a mentor or boss, you believe in them for their positive and uplifting qualities that you say, I trust that this person is going to exude this or express this in times of need so that we can build our company or we can build our relationships. And monitoring progress after the fact. So every time you do something working towards your set goal, I want you to reward yourself. Because once you do that, you're going to release dopamine in the brain. That's your motivation and reward chemical. And what that's going to do is convince and communicate to the brain that that's enjoyment. I like doing that. If you do that for every little step, then what's going to happen is it's going to be easy working toward that base goal. You're going to enjoy it, right? You're actually going to create what we call a Parkinson's principle effect. And that means that you're telling yourself, I'm going to do something in a lot amount of time. And when your brain is given an amount of time, like 15 minutes is kind of the happy number here, because your brain can say, I can do anything in 15 minutes. Then it's going to work its damnedest to do that in that 15 minutes. All right, next, avoiding blame and personalization. So blaming of self and blaming of others. So I think we all know this, but I just want to reiterate this because it's something we forget about sometimes. When we blame, we throw a wedge in between ourself and growth. And we get stuck there and we become stagnant because we are relinquishing our responsibility to the situation, right? You can't control how people approached you in the past, you know, how many clients you lost last week, the month before, or, you know, the drastic change in business climate recently. But what we can do is we can avoid the onset of blaming and placating responsibility to those things and say, what can I do about it? And taking responsibility of your emotions, taking responsibility of your decisions, and identifying what didn't work, and start establishing a new platform and movement towards the direction that you are trying to work towards. Next, identifying the takeaways and the lessons. I'm sure you all do this, but taking a moment to do some inventory as to what worked and what didn't work is going to be monumental in your growth and your resiliency. We do not want to create habits that were not beneficial, that did not add to productivity, or that created maladaptive and toxic work environments, right? We want to avoid the onset of that continuing. But in order to do that, we've got to be honest and genuine with ourselves as to what those things were and are. All right. And lastly, and this is going to be our anchor here, is with rejection, with setback, with drastic changes in life, we've got to see that as a necessary part of our growth, survival, and resiliency. This will create a different relationship with setback and failure and trauma, because it'll tell us that we need this in order to grow. Right? A YouTube interview that I heard about Mark Zuckerberg, he said, never avoid failing, but always avoid giving up, right? Avoid throwing in the towel. That is going to allow us to know what we're doing it for, right? And reminding us that this is part of the equation here and that we can't avoid it, but we can learn how to better cope and manage it. Because if you avoid failure every turn, what's going to happen is you're going to avoid success as well. You're going to avoid growth. You're going to avoid movement. So let's be wary of that, right? Because fear of anything is not in the actuality of it. It's in the perception and the interpretation of it. So challenge your interpretations if you're starting to realize that they're not benefiting you or they're not allowing you to create a movement forward mindset for you and your company. Right? So being honest and genuine about that. All right, everyone, that's everything that I have for today. I want to thank you so much for your time and getting on this call and trying to learn something new in these challenging and drastic changing of times. So I appreciate your attention and your time. Thank you so much. Leonardo, you're muted on my screen. I think you might be muted for everyone else as well.
Yep, you are correct. I am muted. I'm just talking to an empty room at home. But Matt, again, Nat, I was saying thank you to Nat as well as to Sal for sharing with us this morning. I think that, as we've tackled this topic of resiliency, both in terms of how we manage our team members, how we manage just our businesses, you've had that component coming from Nat, but then the other part is that internal component coming from Sal and how we deal with some of those stressors internally. And so thank you both. And looks like we actually have a question here in our chat box. And so, okay. It was just, again, a thank you from Kim Jones-Fearing, who was just again thanking our panelists and so forth for sharing. So thank you, Kim, for those great words. And we're going to stay with this theme of resiliency and actually shift to Ryan Miller. And Ryan is a principal with Critical Functions, LLC. And we're going to talk about resiliency from the standpoint of actually preparing for the unexpected. And so with that, I'm going to share just a little bit about Ryan and his background. And we're going to be talking about, again, emergency preparedness when disaster strikes. And disaster is not always in the sense of, some catastrophic event, such as maybe a fire, but it could be just in terms of preparing, much like we've had to over the last several months. It could be just what happens if your server goes down. That could actually be in some respects more catastrophic than, maybe the sprinkler going off in your building. But a little bit about Ryan Miller. Ryan is the founder and principal of Critical Functions, an operational risk and resilience advisory firm that helps organizations protect their critical business functions from disruption and disaster and build their enterprise risk management program. Ryan previously served as the appointed emergency management director for Howard County. And for those in the Ellicott City area, certainly got to know Ryan extremely well as he led county recovery efforts during the post-Ellicott City floods. And so with that, I'm going to turn things over to Ryan Miller. And so Ryan, the screen is yours. Let's see here. Has Ryan joined us? I know Ryan was coming in from a couple of other, another engagement. And so we may actually be a little bit early for as we're actually running just slightly ahead of time. So what we'll do is actually use this time until Ryan joins us. And while we still have Sal and Nat, is maybe actually take some questions and additional comments from them. So one, I guess if those of you watching have any questions, certainly we would, allow you this time to ask your question. If you would use the Q&A portal, and certainly I'll be watching there. But maybe while we wait there, I'm going to ask a question to both Nat and Sal. And that is, again, one of the big, things impacting our businesses, certainly with COVID, is the fact that we're juggling so much between whether that's obviously business concerns or even I'll use myself as an example, young school-age kids and that are here at home. And so you're on this Zoom call and you've got the left ear trying to listen to the meeting and the right ear trying to listen to make sure your kids are still logged on. And so maybe, Nat, if you could share maybe from a human resource leadership standpoint, perhaps some things that maybe you would really encourage business owners to do in terms of trying to create that culture of maybe understanding. And then maybe Sal, if you would kind of piggyback off of that from a maybe mental state in the sense of, again, how can maybe as a business owner, you be more sympathetic or just trying to understand it and kind of grapple with, I've got work that needs to be done, but I need to be an understanding boss as well. If you could both kind of touch on that subject, but maybe coming at it a little bit from different angles. So Nat, maybe you first and then followed by Sal.
Sure. When you were asking that question, the first thing that I thought about was Stephen Covey's 7 Habits for Effective People. And one of his habits was I think either number 5 or number 6. Seek first to understand, then be understood. And I think really far as a manager or a boss or an owner, get to understand and potentially walk in the shoes of your employees. You got to get to know them better. That's what we said earlier. Engage and understand when you're hiring those employees or you have existing employees. Get to understand if they've got families and if those employees have a family, or whether or not if they're a sandwich generation, in a sense, they've got children, but they're also taking care of maybe an elderly person. So during this time, you got to walk in those shoes to understand better who that person is and start, as we said earlier, communicate, engage, listen to them. And the more you listen to them, and they will start to share. How is it now that you're home? Describe your home. How many children do you have? And if they're school-age children, you understand that they're home. So again, back from an owner standpoint, and I go back to my presentation, you've got to listen more to your employees now than you've ever had probably in the past, and understand them in terms of what they're thinking, what they're feeling, what they're going through, and at the same time, understand what you're going through, because you may be in the same category as your employees. So there's nothing wrong to me, and I know Sal will probably agree, of having that open communication during this time. So that's my business side of it. And Sal, I'll lean toward you now on the psychotherapy side.
Now, you were right to say that I'm going to agree with what you just said. You know, Forbes magazine recently postulated an article that said the most important quality of a leader is empathy, right? So with empathy, it's opening up your listening ears to what your employees are going through in these times, right? And doing that through opening up lines of communication with one another, right? If you know what your employee's going through, if you know where you stand with this individual, then you know what they're capable of doing with the resources they have and the environments that they're currently in. And that's where you create a collaborative team effort to solve this problem that is presented before us, right? So I think empathy, really sitting with yourself and saying, you know, what is it like for them to go through that? How are they dealing with it? And then 2, opening up those lines of communication, sharing with them what you're going through, what they're going through, creating that bond or that commonality. Because when you give someone the platform of being heard, what they do is they release fear, they release anxiety, and they open their minds up to other possibilities. And then that's where you can start working together with one another. And you can see how receptive they are and you are to kind of changing the current climate and environment of things and what we can do differently moving forward. So,
and I would add to what you just said, when you said changing that climate starts to change that culture of that organization. And that's really what you want to make sure. I think if you do what Sal has recommended and what I've offered too, you're now changing and being far more resilient. And you're going to find coming out of this, you're going to be far more ahead. And from a human resource standpoint, you're going to probably put your company into the mindset of one of the best companies or one of the good companies to work for. And that's the other piece that we add from a human resource standpoint. What are some of the best companies out there that employees will say, hey, this is a great company to work for? And even if you've got a small company, that's what you want to strive for, that we listen, we engage our employees, and they end up telling their friends, they'll tell their coworkers, they tell customers, hey, this is a great place to work.
mm-hmm. Hey, look
Excellent. Thank you, Nick.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead, Sal.
I was going to say, look at
Just go.
real quick, just look at work environments like Google or Pixar. If you go to their offices, they have a lot of areas for breaking, for kind of exploration of thoughts and mind and creativity, and then also different platforms and areas to communicate with one another. And that allows those creative juices to go, and you create higher levels of innovation. And that's one of the most incremental parts of growing your company and developing success and building resiliency, is by really opening yourself up to what we can do differently. Mm-hmm. It's just going to change a lot of the platform and the climate.
No, and with that, I think that both of you, I see Matt has joined, I mean, Ryan has joined us, but Nat and Sal, I want to thank you, and in particular, want to thank Nat, who is on the planning committee, but also it was really, I can say, his ideas and suggestions that really that we should do something that also incorporated, again, resiliency that touched on the mental psyche of what's taking place in the workforce. And obviously, you know, Nat being in the HR realm, it's always good to have your HR folks around that can be thinking about the internal dynamics that we're all facing and dealing with. But particularly, just want to thank you there. And also will say, because I'm married to a psychotherapist and certainly have come to understand some of the mental health challenges that we all are facing. And that is the fact that if you need help, there is nothing wrong with seeking help and going to find someone to talk to. I think that hopefully we're starting to slowly break down the stigma of going to see someone. It is not going in like you saw on the days when I was a kid and the Newhart show came on and you walked in and you just go and laid on someone's sofa. It is really about going to see someone and have a conversation and being able to perhaps have someone to share or that can listen and give you insights as to maybe why you're feeling what you're feeling or what has transpired in your life that's impacting you today. And so if you need assistance or if your employees need assistance, get them that help. And you'll find yourself and them just a better person. Forget about the productivity, but you'll find themselves being better people, being able to better adapt to change in the environment that we currently are in. And so that's it for my soapbox. But with that, we'll segue into Ryan Miller of Critical Functions. And Ryan, you have the ability to share screen on your side. And so the screen is yours. And again, thank you, Nat, as well as Sal. No.
Good morning.
Ryan, oh, okay. There you go.
How are you doing this morning?
Everyone is good. Do you need to share screen on your side?
Sure.
Okay, so it's all yours.
Great, thank you. Well, I couldn't, only caught the tail end of that last conversation there, Leonardo, but I couldn't agree more with what how you ended there. I mean, right now, just in general, what a challenging time. And frankly, that term resiliency really was pioneered by those in either the social work or the kind of the psychotherapy type realm. We found this out when previously when I was serving in the role as emergency manager for Howard County, we actually started a position called a resiliency coordinator. And we put the job advertisement out and couldn't quite figure out why like a quarter of the applicants came from a social work background. And then we figured it out. Oh, okay. Well, actually, the emergency planning preparedness community might have borrowed that one from the social work world. So they really have pioneered the world of resiliency. But there certainly is a lot of crossover, and we're seeing that right now. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to present today, Leonardo, and to the Chamber. I was invited by both Larry Tweel and Larry to be part of this today. I'm pretty excited to share with you some thoughts on this area of being prepared, resiliency from a business perspective. Let me see if I can share my slides. All right. Leonardo, can I get a thumbs up that you can see the slide that's on your screen there? Thumbs up. Okay, great. Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so yeah, thank you again for the invitation today. Just a real quick background of who I am. My name is Ryan Miller. I'm the principal of Critical Functions. I have a background in crisis management. Some of you know, here in Howard County, I was previously the Director of Emergency Management for Howard County. But now, as of a couple years ago, I've shifted my focus to the private sector, primarily working with mid-sized manufacturers, both in Howard County as well as across the state and even across the country. Professionally, I guess I've got some credentials in emergency management, obviously business continuity, and also risk management. It really was through my experience, though, and again, I say this knowing that we've got a lot of my friends from Howard County Economic Development on the line, just really working with business owners who had gone through a lot of loss, either through any number of disasters that we've had in Howard County, kind of working backwards. Of course, the Ellicott City flash flood disasters, but even back even further to things like, the derecho or the tragic Ellicott City train derailment. My career really started. I'm a local to Howard County, not born here, but went through school here and really got involved in public safety at a pretty young age, at age 19, actually, with fire and rescue. So my background goes all the way back to really being a frontline responder. But through it all, watching people lose their homes, lose their businesses on occasion, really sparked this interest in helping them. So you're going to see that overlaid throughout this presentation. I guess it also really lends itself to my, I'll call it sort of my personal philosophy, and I'll share that with you in a second. As opposed to just being really stovepiped, I've tried to knit multiple ideas together today for you. And we only have 40 minutes together, so it's not a lot of time, but I'm going to do my best to show you how I think all these things fit together. So we're going to talk about why we should be ready for emergencies. And it's 2020. It's not going to take a whole lot of convincing, I don't think, to convince everyone that we need to be ready for emergencies and disruption. But just in case there's any question, I think the first few slides are going to convince you that now is the time to be ready for whatever comes at us next. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what I view as kind of 3 things anybody can do right now. And this won't be a Mad Lib style emergency preparedness guide. I think there is a time and place for those kinds of exercises, but these are like really tangible things you can take back to your team right away. And then lastly, sort of how you can implement this on an ongoing basis. So these related actions, and then how do you really do this like literally this afternoon if you wanted to. That's the goal. As far as my personal philosophy, I really do believe we've unfortunately kind of pulled all these things apart. And the average business owner now has a hard time figuring out what should they do right now to be ready for I'll call a sudden emergency. And how does that fit together with this idea of business continuity planning? Like, do I need to hire somebody? Is that like a big thick book that I need to go through? Is that something I can even do as a team? And then maybe even more esoteric is this notion of enterprise risk management or integrated risk management. And how does that fit together with the kind of the current real pressures of being ready for sudden emergencies and disruptions? My personal philosophy is there really is a common theme throughout all of these, and I'm going to try to articulate a way to knit them together. So it's been a pretty crazy year. A friend of mine posted this on LinkedIn. I thought it was pretty funny. It's been a really, really long year. In fact, I personally sometimes talk about personal resilience. I have to go, what season is it even at this point? What month is it? So it's been a little of a bumpy road in 2020. But for a moment, we're going to actually leave 2020 and we're going to go all the way back to October 26th, 2012. Maybe I'll ask, Leonardo. At that point, you weren't in Maryland, right? Do you remember what you were doing in October of 2012?
Right.
All right, so
I was dealing with 1-month-old twins.
Oh my. Okay. Wow. All right. Well, then that might actually lower the the scenario here a little bit, because 2 1-month-old twins sounds like you had your hands full. I don't know if you remember at that point, Leonardo, if you were, I think you were on the East Coast at that point. Do you remember this Hurricane Sandy, steaming up the coast? And looks like it was pretty well on its entire trajectory, steered away from Georgia, which I'm sure, as if you were a dad of new twins, you were like, good, that's one less thing I have to worry about, right? So we up here in Maryland, we're watching Hurricane Sandy steam up the coast, and a lot of preparedness actions were being taken to put into place, and people are going through plans and like, what is this going to really mean? And then, to be honest with you, Friday 5 p.m. came, and we were like, oh, great, this is perfect. This is going to sail right past us. And it's going to go out to sea. That's really what you want to see with hurricanes, is like they just go out to sea and they fizzle somewhere up in the cold Northeast oceans. Party time, right? Everybody's gone. It's Friday afternoon, 5 o'clock. Get to leave for the day. Good news, party on. The next morning, however, this happened. This storm made a hard left and was forecast to be like the emergency manager's biggest fear. This is the kind of the ex-hurricane, the one that comes right up the bay, the fabled bay storm. So it put everybody into immediate tailspin. This is one of my favorite episodes from The Office, the famous disaster exercise drill in The Office. Instant panic. Of course, now it's Friday night now, right? It's what can you really do over the weekend? Either if you're in local government or if you own a business, what really can you do? Because now you've got kind of the weekend and your team is all dispersed. So just throwing that out as like a scenario where even sometimes where we think we know how the outcome is going to play out, like these curveballs come out of nowhere, even hurricanes. Thankfully, we all know that storm ultimately, unfortunate for New York, New Jersey, of course, that storm made landfall up in New York, New Jersey, but it actually had some pretty significant effects in our area, even as far west as Garrett County. A small team of us actually went out to Garrett County after the storm. Again, this is October, like this is around Halloween time. Literally, this is like next week. This storm impacted Maryland. So the leaves were still on the trees out in Western Maryland, and produced basically a hurricane force blizzard that knocked out 75% of the power out in Western Maryland. So even when it's not a direct hit, we can have some severe impacts. All right, so that's like the natural hazards front here, right? How about other areas? So I've listed a few of them here. The bottom line is they're all increasing in every area. 6 in 10 people fear right now workplace violence, a mass shooting in their workplace. Another one, ransomware, clearly on the increase, 40% increase in 2019. It's interesting. We all keep saying the same thing. We're not really sure what the impact's going to be because we're all working remotely or working from home, but we know that it's increasing the threat of both ransomware and just cyber attacks in general. Another about information theft. One recent study, 2/3 of job respondents admitted to taking stolen data from past employers onto their new jobs. And then the last one, severe storms. Again, back to that kind of perennial natural hazards threat, not just hurricanes in the month of October, but just severe storms in general. I read a statistic recently that said we've had twice the number of tornadoes between 2010 and 2020 as we had between the same time period, the same 10-year block of 2000 to 2010. Twice the number of tornadoes in our area. So no question, everything is on the increase. All hazards, all risks are on the increase. Let's look at some data from Munich Re. This is a reinsurance giant. They track these things very closely. Same thing, we're looking all the way back to 1980 on the increase, a 40-year perspective. It doesn't appear to be going anywhere but up. And by the way, I think if we would have looked at this maybe 6 months ago, we would have said that 2018 was the highest wildfire loss in the state of California. They think now, 2020, we've most likely blown past those numbers. just talking to a guy who wrote a pretty cool book, Mighty Midsize, a guy named Robert Scher, kind of then bringing this back to us, this conversation here at the Business Summit, is when he wrote this book, if you opened it up and you went through the 7 silent growth killers, you won't see a whole lot about disaster. Well, he said, wow, it's the number one. I mean, you can't ask for a bigger killer of growth than having a disaster. And we know that to be true. The number one, one of the top hazards for business would be a sudden emergency that they're not prepared for. Statistic we all like to use is about 50% of businesses that suffer a disaster will never reopen again. And I'm sure Leonardo, your team would probably confirm that that's the case across the country. So let's just kind of flash back. Now we're kind of moving forward. We've looked quite some time ago. Now we're looking at about a year ago. I thought this was an interesting article in Chief Executive Magazine that said, CEOs, they're still in the dark about supply chain. And this quote that said, when looking at supply chain, executives said what's relatively unimportant in driving cash and growth. Fast forward that 1 year later, of course, now we've experienced COVID. 1 year later, an article was published that said that we have been blindsided by the coronavirus, and that of the Fortune 1000 companies, 938 of these companies actually have one of their tier 1 or tier 2 suppliers in the Wuhan province of China. Basically, just about every major company has some sort of interest in this area that was largely shut down in the early stages of COVID, but we were blindsided. And I guess the question is, can we really say at that point we were blindsided, at least from a supply chain perspective, when we really had this information available to us? A year later, we say we're blindsided. But I would argue we had this information right in front of us. We just didn't have a really good framework to identify it in advance. Now, I do want to share a little bit of good news. The locusts aren't coming until next year. So when thinking about all the things that can happen in 2020, locust or the cicada invasion isn't one of them, but they are coming next year. In fact, trillions of cicadas are on their way. If anybody remembers, what was it, 2003, the last time the Brood X cicadas were out, pretty loud. So if you've got any outdoor events planned for next summer, you're going to have a lot of cicadas to compete with. Okay, so some more good news. So let's talk about what we can actually do about this, sort of where the rubber meets the road, right? If we do take on this notion of being prepared for sudden emergencies and start to develop a posture in our businesses for resiliency, building risk management capability, there's some really good outcomes. I know Larry and his team, this is a local image. This is right down the street at the Lakeside office building. I know Larry and his team were there right afterwards, like the next morning, doing what they do, which is helping businesses immediately recover and relocate. But what kinds of benefits do we have? Because that's what we're all interested in, right? The business benefits of doing these things, not just doing them for the sake of doing them. But what are some of the business benefits? Well, one might be a reduced liability for financial losses. Depending on where you are, if you are a supplier to another entity, or you're a service provider to another entity, you could have reduced liability for financial losses. Certainly, oftentimes it's about people, right? Reducing the life safety risk for your visitors and employees. That's a benefit. Reducing disaster-related property loss. I just had somebody say this to me again yesterday. Well, that's what insurance is for. We all know this to be the truth. Like, insurance only covers some things. It certainly doesn't cover reputational loss, and a lot of actual dollar losses are not made up by an insurance claim. And if nothing else, you have to survive until you actually receive those payments. So just reducing your property loss. And I just spoke to this, reducing your reputational risk or reducing the loss to your reputation for an outage is a significant one as well. It's good for business as well. We've got Benjamin there looking at us. He reminds us that, honestly, during an emergency, we're seeing this now, or a disaster, there are going to be some businesses that, aren't able to evolve through it. And so those businesses that are most prepared are going to stand to gain after an emergency because they're still around. They might actually gain some market share as a result. This is an interesting one. I've chatted with several folks in the M&A space about just valuation. Like, this is something that's becoming more and more valuable to businesses as they look to kind of crank up different value levers within their company. Is two companies. One of them has a demonstrated track record of getting through disruption and disaster and has a clearly articulated plan for dealing with the next one. Which company would you want to invest in? Which company might you consider partnering with or purchasing? So increased valuation. There could be also an opportunity to negotiate better terms with suppliers because you've shown, again, your ability to absorb and continue operations despite emergencies. And then I always put the question mark after lower insurance premiums. I know there's a quantitative element to insurance premiums and insurance underwriting. And then there's also some qualitative elements. I've had many brokers tell me that if you can help them tell the story to the carrier, you could potentially benefit from lower insurance premiums. And then how about this one? Is this good for you? Back to that previous presentation about resilience. There's nothing worse than having just this nagging feeling all the time that you haven't done enough, or you're not ready, or that the next thing that blindsides us or catches us off guard could be the end of your business. That's awful. None of us like to live like that. So to take some actionable steps means less worry. It also puts you in a better position when somebody asks the question, what's our plan? What would we do if? As a leader, it's terrible to be in the position to not have a good answer for that. But it's also bad to have to face your board of directors or your investors or potential business partner and say, well, actually, we really don't have a plan. And then the last is probably my favorite, is it increases your ability to really focus on your core goals. Those of you who run businesses, you don't set out to run your business and then plan to spend all of your time worrying about what's going to be around the next corner. You really want to focus on your business objectives. And so to free up that mental bandwidth to really do what you do best, channels your energy in the right direction, as opposed to, again, being distracted by the what if scenarios. So the question is, then why don't we do anything? And I'm just curious if I can just take a breath here and a sip of water. Larry, I'm looking at your smiling face there on the screen. Maybe if you could look at this list and point to the one that you think might be the most prevalent, why it is that maybe business leaders don't ever get around to doing this, or maybe one that's not on the list.
I think it's one of those you just don't think about it. It's not front of mind always. It's the you just don't realize what the impacts can be for not doing it. So it's competing priorities. Obviously, the puzzle's unclear, but obviously when something happens, it's the now I need it. You don't realize how what the impacts can be if you're not ready for it.
Okay, well, that's super honest. I appreciate that. I've shared this before with some folks. My dad actually called me OSHA as a high schooler. So I see the world very differently, and I forget that not everybody sees the world this way. I just as I kind of go through my day, I see what could potentially go wrong. That's sort of always been my wiring. But you're absolutely right. I think a lot of leaders, their foot on the gas pedal, they're optimists. I've had business leaders say, if I wasn't okay with taking risks, I wouldn't be running a business, So there's this sort of like, what, I don't know how much time I really need to spend preparing for a hurricane that might not ever show up. I've got all these other things to deal with. So thank you for that, Larry. It's looks like competing priorities is probably the one that wins out from your perspective.
Good.
So yeah, there's increasing pressure. There's every day is a little different. There's competing priorities in running a business. This one's interesting, and this was really brought to my attention by Robert Scher, the gentleman who I mentioned wrote that book. Is he said once you start looking at mid-sized companies, there really is a lack of advisory services for them. Most advisory services goes towards the large companies. A lot of the advisory services are from large firms. And then you lose maybe the expertise when you start asking for something like, could you help me with enterprise risk management or risk management consulting? And certainly there's not a whole lot of folks that are focused on small and mid-sized companies with this particular topic. So like, where do you go to get the help is the bottom line. And I know in Howard County, we have the benefit of having a pretty robust ecosystem of advisors across the spectrum of functions within a business. But it's still up to you to kind of assemble them, if you will. So the puzzle is a little unclear, and we're never really sure if you've covered all your bases. I'm thinking back to some of the presentations I've gone to around cybersecurity. This has been a theme through the chamber, even cybersecurity. You spend some time with a Brian Dykstra or, Ron Gula or Patrick Wynn, like it's, you're terrified about the cybersecurity risk, but there's a lot of other things we need to look at. So in a second, I'm going to list those off. All right. So where do I start? Let's kind of shift gears here to the more practical steps. What do I do? Let's assume that if you weren't already coming into this session, the first 5 or 6 slides convinced you and you're like, okay, good point. 2020 has been a bumpy ride. We're not sure what the future is going to hold. I need to be ready. What should I do? One thing you could do is it's branded as being specific to manufacturers, but the keys that are in this guide that are available online on my website are pretty much universal. There are 3 tips that you can implement right away, and I'll share those with you in just a second. They're leadership, location, and logistics. It's a simple little guidebook. You can download it, and they're kind of the basics. I'm sure, Larry, as you think about the different businesses that you and your team have helped over the years, you could see the value in, making sure that you identify in advance who's going to be in charge. And this could be from a sudden small emergency to something larger. Some companies really wrestle with this. Do I need to get permission from the board of directors for a certain action? Or is it the plant manager, or is it the CEO that's going to be calling the shots? So I've got some questions laid out for you to get to the bottom of that one. Location, again, thinking back to the scenario there in Colombia or in any other disaster scenario, like where do you even meet your team? It's going to be cold soon. You don't want to be huddled around somebody's car or standing on the other side of that proverbial yellow do not cross tape, trying to figure out where do we get together to start to reconstitute our business. So I've got some ideas there. And then logistics. I've collected a pretty decent starter list of things that businesses should have securely stored online that'll jumpstart their recovery should they have a sudden emergency. So that's one step that you can take, a very practical step. The second, this might be a more advanced action, but it doesn't need to be super complicated. It would be to develop a business continuity plan. So it goes into that. This is actual photograph that I took from a client site as COVID was unfolding. And it was a really neat experience. To be honest with you, it really felt like I was back in the emergency operations center. I had the dry erase marker in my hand, was in front of the dry erase board, and I wasn't necessarily the expert. The expert was the CEO and his leadership team. And my job was really as a facilitator. So it was, I called it business continuity planning under fire. And by the way, my personal bias is that, it's best to do these things before the disaster happens. But as I posted on LinkedIn and written a couple articles, like, it's never too late. You get the dry erase marker in your hand, you get your team around the table, you can drive out some of these things pretty quickly. And that's exactly what we did. Was, okay, this is a mid-sized manufacturing company. What's most critical? Like, what has to continue to happen? What do we have a legal or contractual obligation or financial requirement to continue to do? It literally can be that simple. And then we start to drive out, and as you can see in the photograph there, like, okay, so now let's talk about material suppliers, record systems, people, facilities. We started charting all these things out, and then we set objectives. Same way that you dig out of a disaster in the public space is the same way you dig out of an emergency in the private sector, is you chunk off what you can actually get done in a fixed period of time. And that's what we did, pretty much on a daily basis for 3 or 4 days until the flywheel is spinning. And they had gone through and really clipped off some really key things, to include drilling down to some of their suppliers. Where do we have supplier risk? Where do they stand? What's their ability to deliver on their commitments to us? So that was a really neat experience. And it really proved to me that, again, ideally you do this in advance, but if you don't have the opportunity to, some of it can be done under fire. I'm going to just quickly, since we promised to demystify some of what goes into this process, again, this is the core. What must be protected? You gather the information, look for vulnerabilities, you take actions to immediately reduce risk. Again, not when the bullets are flying, but in advance, you look for what resource needs you might have. Should you have a threat to one of those critical business functions, you develop some strategies, create teams, develop the SOPs and the action plans. You test the plan. You don't hope it's going to work. You actually test it. Really simple. Not the office style, by the way, where you pull the fire alarm and you see what happens. But you slowly walk everybody through the plan so everybody gets comfortable with it. And then you distribute it, and then just kind of classic good management, plan, do, check, act, or whatever other continuous quality feedback loop you want to implement for your plan. The goal is to continue to get better over time. And by the way, a little footnote: this could be because of your own events, your own emergencies or your own near misses. Kind of the hurricane scenario. Hurricane went out to sea. That was great. Boy, that was a real scramble. All right, well, what did we learn? Did we identify any gaps in our plan through that process? You roll those things back into your plan and you just get a little bit better. Or quite honestly, you look at even what's happening in some other place. Maybe it's your industry, but in another town or another state. What did they learn and how can that influence our plan? And then, kind of like Leonardo said earlier, like sometimes you just need to kind of talk about it, get it out on the table. I also advocate for just putting risk management on the agenda, for your leadership team. Most of my clients are pretty small. They've got small leadership teams, 5 or 6 people. They're meeting on a weekly basis. Like, let's actually make this one of the things we talk about. And you don't necessarily even need a guy like me at the table. I use this. This is a little card. Don't have one handy. Actually, I do. I call this this is sort of the Ouija board. That might be a dated term, but the one that you see on the screen, this is a little simple 6x9 card. But I use it as a thing I slide across the table, back when we could really do that. And oftentimes the CEOs, their finger would start going down this list and they go, okay, all right. And their finger usually stop and they go, that's the one that really worries me. Okay, great. Like, then, use this framework as a way to drive some conversation. So put it on the agenda. By the way, there's 6 of these critical business functions. The year's got 12 months in it. You do 1 a month. That means twice a year, you're going to talk about each one of them. Really simple way to make sure that you're touching on each aspect, the critical business functions of your organization, and nothing then ever really falls off the radar. As I mentioned earlier, I would say, the Atlantic data perspective would probably be in that defend your information technology. They could drill in there pretty hard, but there's 5 other things that you're going to want to make sure that you're touching on. So again, it kind of prevents your risk management program from becoming too focused on any one area, or that you don't accidentally miss one completely. Just a real quick story on one of these. One client, we were looking actually at single point failures, and we realized that one element of their shipping process had a single point failure. And just before we had the chance to create some backup to that position, the one person who could do one certain specialized kind of shipping, that person went out on long-term leave, and they literally couldn't ship a product because one person had a certain skill set and a special kind of training to ship their product. So, this process will eventually, if you keep kind of working through it, you'll start seeing opportunities to reduce risk within your organization. Here they are again, if it was hard to read, those 6 critical functions listed out for you. And then I'll take that off the screen. My daughter told me that it hurts her eyes. So a couple bonuses as I kind of come towards a close here. A couple of readings that might be helpful to you. Risk Management in Plain English. I think I had that one handy as well. Yes, thin book. You can't see from the image there, but like, this doesn't have to be super complicated. This gentleman, Norman Marks, I've chatted with him a few times on the phone. He's out in California. He's on a mission also to make risk management for executives really simple, really actionable, so it doesn't have to be complicated. And then the book to the right of Norman's book, a really cool book just on decision making. At the end of the day, that's what this really boils down to. Is it's all about achieving your organization's objectives despite uncertainty. And uncertainty requires decision making. To your point, Larry, like, it's competing priorities every day. It's juggling. So how do you make these decisions at the right time in the right way? So the Estelle Purdy book is a kind of a neat framework for making decisions on an ongoing basis. Again, ultimate goal to achieve your business objectives. Okay, so that brings me to the end. Again, I hope this is practical. That was the goal, to share a little bit of my personal philosophy, but give you some actionable tools. The guide, pretty simple framework to prepare your organization for sudden emergencies. Maybe that might be the 101. The 201 is to use a framework. I propose maybe the 6 critical business functions is something that you and your team can use on an ongoing basis to make sure that you're touching each of these areas. And then maybe the last might be to say, okay, let's like really focus on this and dedicate some internal and maybe external resources to actually developing a plan and a written set of protocols for our organization. But nothing else, hopefully giving you some tools that you can implement right away.
Excellent. Thank you, Ryan, for sharing a lot of great nuggets. And certainly, I think the whole planning piece is one of those things that I think, as you touched on, it's falls in that we know we all need to do it, but sometimes fall short of doing the things that we know we need to do. But again, thanks for sharing and so forth. So, with that, we are now going to get ready to kind of, I guess, pivot, since that seems to be the buzzword these days, and move from talking about resiliency to taking, in essence, all of these things that we've talked about over the last 3 weeks, whether it's resiliency in terms of our business planning, to resiliency and how we deal with our employees to looking at financing to marketing, and kind of put that all together with the end goal being at the end of the day, we want business. And one of the places that we often want business from is either our local governments, our school systems, our community colleges, basically our public institutions. And so we have a tremendous group that's been assembled. And before I do introductions, there was a question asked, will the slides be made available? And so Ryan, if you're still here, I'll just go and say yes. And Sandy, we have your information, and we'll certainly make sure that the slides are available that we follow up with. And so we'll make sure that we get you that information. But as I was sharing, we've got a great panel that has been assembled on this last session, particularly as we start talking about procurement in the public sector. And so we have with us Dean Hoff, who was the Director of Purchasing with Howard County Government, Douglas Pendle, who was the Director of Purchasing with Howard County Public School System, and Dominic Cusimano, who is the Director of Procurement with Howard County Community Colleges. Wow, I just noticed this. We've got the 3 Ds. And so Dean, Doug, and Dominic, the triplets. And so, and it's going to be moderated by Sharon Moore Jackson of SM Jackson Government and Business Solutions. And so I'm going to just share quickly with you their backgrounds for those of you that may not know them. And so again, starting with the lady of the group, and that is Sharon Moore Jackson. And she is an award-winning small business, minority, and women-owned advocate with over 30 years of real and substantial supplier diversity, inclusion, contracting, moderator, speaker, and compliance experience with the state of Maryland's Governor's Office of Minority Affairs, Prince George's County Supplier Development and Diversity Division, the Prince George's County Board of Education, and the Maryland Department of Human Resources Office of Employment and Program Equity. Her firm, SM Jackson Government and Business Solutions, mission is to ensure that the diverse and women-owned businesses have fair and equitable access to opportunities and resources to successfully compete in all markets. Currently, she is serving as the MBE Compliance and Community Engagement Manager for Clark Construction on the University of Maryland Capital Region Medical Center project in Largo, Maryland, a nearly 600,000 square foot, $543 million project. The MBE goal for this project is 25%, and the actual goal to date has been 78%. So certainly I think in terms of facilitating this conversation, we've got a great advocate in Sharon Moore Jackson. Dean Hoff, as I stated earlier, is the Purchasing Administrator of Howard County Government's Office of Purchasing. They provide educational resources to advise and guide local Howard County-based businesses and equal business organizations, minority, women-owned, and disabled-owned businesses, enterprises through the procurement process, vendor registration, how to get certified in Howard County local business, and the equal business opportunity programs. Douglas Pender is the Director of Purchasing for Howard County Public Schools, where he's been for the last 25 years. The Purchasing Office supports the school system through a combination of direct bids and the utilization of cooperatively awarded contracts. The school system employs over 8,000 staff and educates over 56,000 students, and approximately $104 million is spent on contracted goods and services in the operating budget, with another nearly $108 million spent on construction and building maintenance from the capital budget. They purchase a wide range of goods and services from architectural consultants to technology to building construction, maintenance, and repair for over 77 facilities. Lastly, but certainly not least, Dominic Cusimano is the Director of Purchasing, Director of Procurement at Howard Community College. And Dominic he started there over 4 years ago as the procurement coordinator and has been director for nearly 3 years. Prior to working at HCC, he practiced law in small business litigation for a firm in Rockville. And so it's my pleasure to turn things over to Sharon Moore Jackson and her team. And ultimately, they're going to talk really about just public procurement and various do's and don'ts and doing business with the public sector. And so with that, I'm going to stop sharing and turn things over to Sharon and her team.
Thank you, Leonardo. Good morning, everyone. And thank you for the opportunity to moderate this exciting panel. And I love the theme of resiliency. It's very timely. Before we get started, I just wanted to give you an understanding of how this discussion is going to take place. I would like for all three of the panelists with their expertise to just give a brief overview of what their agency procures, give a brief overview of your expertise and any opportunities that are coming down the pike for small local minority businesses to participate. And with that, I will ask a series of questions for all three of you to engage in. So with that being said, I'd like to start with the first gentleman, and that would be Mr. Dean Hoff with Howard County Government, to give us an understanding of Howard County's expenditures. How long have you, I know that Leonardo did a brief introduction of your years of service, but give us an understanding, how long have you been doing this and the types of vendors you engage in doing business in this COVID-19 especially, and what are you doing differently as opposed to what you were doing prior to COVID-19 as we're going to this visual base of doing business. So we'll start with you.
Okay, good morning. Thank you, Sharon. Okay, so to give you, I guess, a background on my experience with Howard County government, earlier, Ryan Miller mentioned, what were you doing October 26, 2012? I was actually celebrating my 18th day with Howard County government. So, been here since October 2012. I've worked my way up, started as a senior buyer, worked up to deputy administrator. Now I'm the purchasing administrator, or, I guess some people say director. Yeah, things have definitely changed. They've changed a lot. We're just like this, we're using Zoom, we're using WebEx, we're using Microsoft Teams a lot more. That's how we interact with our staff now. We have weekly calls. That's completely different. Interacting with vendors the same way. I'm doing a lot of meetings with vendors, meeting through WebEx or through Zoom. It's changed some. I miss the in-person meetings, but we're making this work. Like Nat Alston said, this is the new norm, so we're just adjusting to it. As far as expenditures, we spend about $240 million a year on goods and services to support the county constituents. Everything from mowers and playground equipment for the parks to legal consulting services to paving services, janitorial, landscaping. I mean, you name it, anything to keep the county running, we purchase it. But yeah, that's in a nutshell kind of what we do at Howard County Government.
And since we're in the current fiscal year and we're going into 2021, do you anticipate any contracting opportunities that are going forward that will yield itself to local participation, contracts that are small that you don't necessarily have to have a solicitation go outside, but just to pick up the telephone? How is that being processed?
Okay, sure. So our capital projects are still moving forward. They always provide opportunities for whether it's minority, women-owned, disabled-owned businesses, local businesses. We're proud of that. As far as contracting opportunities or non-contracting opportunities for companies that don't have to bid, we have our local business initiative. And what that is we get local businesses to register with Howard County. When agencies contact us, agencies, departments contact us with a need for good or service that's valued under $10,000, we have our list, we have our database of local registered businesses, and we're always encouraging these agencies and departments to contact them to find a way to procure that good or service from a local business.
Okay. And how do you reach out to the community at large?
Oh, good question. We have a lot of outreach events. Actually, under County Executive Calvin Ball, he's definitely encouraged us to do more outreach events. So we're very proud of doing more of those. Now we're adjusting to doing these virtual outreach events. In the beginning, it was a little different, but we're adjusting to it, and it's going very well.
Okay, thank you for that.
Sure.
Our next speaker will come from Howard Community College, Dominic.
Morning. Hi. Yeah, so let me bring my mind back to the questions that you had asked us to respond to.
Okay. Do I need to refresh?
I think I'm good for now. I'll ask you if I need a refresher.
Okay, all right.
Going back to briefly my experience at Howard Community College and how long I've been there. As was noted in the introduction, I've been at the college a little over 4 years at this point.
Mm-hmm.
As the procurement coordinator, and as of around 3 years ago or so, I've been director of procurement. I took a little bit of a different path to get to procurement than some other folks. I was a practicing attorney before this, working at a small litigation firm in Rockville that did anything and everything from criminal defense work to business litigation to real estate. If it's a legal matter and you can think of it, I'm sure that we had our hand in it. So I've been at the college for about that long now. So the college has some needs that are similar to what the county purchases. For instance, obviously we have some fairly specialized needs since we're an institution of higher education,
Mm-hmm.
but certainly things like purchases that support our infrastructure. So we do construction projects. We need grounds maintenance, things like that. We also purchase things that support our educational mission. So whether that be specialized education software, whether that be building relationships with outside entities to provide classes for our continuing education courses and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
We so have all the technology needs that you might expect of an institution like ours. Actually, right now we have a bid on the street the bid actually just closed, but we're looking to purchase a new HR information system right now, which is a pretty significant undertaking. Taking up a great deal of my time right now. Things like that. I mean, if college needs it, we're buying it. The one thing that we don't really deal with some other institutions of higher education is obviously as a community college, we don't have residences or anything like that.
So from the community college's standpoint, do you follow the guidelines of the state of Maryland's Minority Business Enterprise program?
So the community colleges are a little weird. We're a little bit separate. So we're a state entity, but we aren't fall under necessarily the same laws. Doug's nodding. I know Doug is familiar with this too. It's a real funky setup you have going on with the community colleges. We have our own separate beast, as compared to maybe the county entities or state agencies. We're a little bit closer to the Wild West, as it were, in terms of the types of legal strictures that we're under. But we do look to the state of Maryland's, obviously we have to follow procurement law, but we look to Maryland practices for best practices and things like that. We also look to the county for best practices.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of minority business requirements, we don't really have those, but we do like to encourage our end users to look to minority businesses and local businesses. We refer to the county's business initiative and encourage our end users to look to that when they're making small purchases under $10,000. The occasion where we do need to follow the state guidelines are when we are doing a project that has state funding. So when most are big construction projects.
So that would be your CIP? Capital project?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Thank you for that overview. And now I will turn it over to Mr. Doug Pendell.
Hey, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thanks for having us. I've been at this in the procurement field for over 35 years now, and started out in the private sector, working for a local manufacturing firm. They're still in business, and that's where I cut my teeth on the art of negotiating, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Getting the things that the sales folks sold for us that hadn't been created yet. So very challenging time. Then I did a number of years in the county sector, actually Montgomery County government purchasing. Learned a lot of the structure and requirements in a formal policy-driven world. And then, as noted, for the last 25 plus years, been with Howard County, and It's been a great experience. I grew up in the county, so it was like coming home. In that world, what I've learned is that we do, while we are education focused, as noted, we have over 77 facilities that we have to take care of. So we do have a fairly robust CIP program, capital improvement program, and with a budget of over 800 million, with about 15% of that going to the contracting outsourcing world. That's about a little over $100 million that we spend, that we source out, and that's in the form of everything from the proverbial worn out phrase of soup to nuts. That's technology, that's software, that's equipment, that's rooftop air handlers, boilers, classroom furniture, obviously office supplies. And again, a range of services in the form of consultants, whether they be agencies that provide us nurses, to temporary services, to psychological services, all the way through to architectural and construction management agency services that we purchase. And then again, equipment, anything that you would need to run a facility or a complex like we have of, again, 77 buildings. Most of those obviously school classroom structure, but we have a number of regular office buildings that need maintenance as well. So that's the range.
Clearly, all three of you have a large budget to do an enormous amount of purchasing for the systems that you work for. So my question now is, I know that there are vendor databases that all of the agencies have. How does one get on a listing for preferred provider? And I know that the state of Maryland has a preferred provider, but is there such a listing for your respective agencies? And if so, how does one get on those preferred providers? And if you could identify what categories of work would qualify for that? And we'll start with Howard County government.
Okay, sure. So we don't necessarily have a list of preferred suppliers. What we do have is our e-bidding or e-procurement system. This is where any vendor can go in and self-register. And when we publish solicitations, depending on what service and commodity codes they register for, they'll get notified of those new solicitations.
Okay. What about Howard County Community College?
So similarly, we don't really have a preferred vendor database or anything like that. Our internal vendor database is really only used for vendors that we have an established relationship with. It's primarily a means of issuing payment and things like that. We don't, unfortunately, have an e-procurement system. The goal is to one day have one of those and have a more robust vendor communication system tied in with that. But as of now, the primary way that we notify vendors is we post our solicitations on the college's website, and then we also advertise all of our solicitations on the state of Maryland's EMMA platform.
Okay, e-Maryland Marketplace. Okay.
Yes, correct.
And Doug, what about you?
Yeah, we're in the same boat. Yeah, for our threshold is 25,000. So anything, any goods or services over 25,000, we post as a formal solicitation on e-Maryland Marketplace Advantage. We don't have any internal preferred list as well. It's really a matter of, if we have a supplier who's done a great job for us, we typically go back to them on the small procurements anyway. We are in the throes of implementing a new contract management system that is tailored to suit more of our needs, with a focus of the local and minority and disadvantaged folks, as a way of letting our decentralized purchasers know that we do have a list or a pool that they can go to. So we're in the process of developing that. The challenge we have is, and I think we all experience this, is we're commodity driven based.
Mhm.
So where the challenge comes in is sometimes, quite frankly, some of our suppliers or vendors don't know how to characterize themselves within that system. And where we're looking for, be generic, a widget or a purple widget, they've classified themselves as a green widget. And
Mhm.
unfortunately, we notify all the purple widget suppliers, but they didn't get notification because they said they were a green widget. So that's an area I think we need to really try to work on. We've again, in my experience, we've seen a gamut of being too general and being too specific.
Okay.
So at some point, hopefully, we'll be able to find that sweet spot where everybody knows what it is that we're looking for and falls into the right bucket. So when we go looking for that bucket, we captured the right number of suppliers.
So let's shift to the outreach and training for your constituency. What tools do you have available within your organizations that help you reach out to the community to identify and to reintroduce for those who may know you but may have strayed away, to get a better understanding of the services that the school system, the community college, and the government provides for people who can do the work that you're looking for? Are there any training programs that are that you have that helps people, like management technical trainings, or you're working in conjunction with other like-minded organizations to help further strengthen the pool of vendors that are out there that can compete and actually do the work that you're looking for? And again, I'll go back to the government, and then I'll go to the community college, and then the public school system. Just want to get an understanding of the community engagement, and in doing so, to further enhance understanding and utilization.
Sure. So we recently just started a virtual training session for local EBO businesses, vendors in general. So we had our first one in September, which was targeting EBO businesses and local businesses. It was telling vendors about our programs and also more about doing business with Howard County.
Mhm.
And then we are alternating this with one on our e-commerce system, on our e-procurement system, as well as doing business with the county. So we just actually had one yesterday. It was well attended. And we're just reaching out to the general public, trying to really get new vendors in so we get them registered so they're notified of solicitations. We really want to grow this database of registered vendors as well as local businesses.
Right. And community college?
So the college doesn't offer training per se to vendors, the vendor community or anything like that. A lot of our interfacing with the vendor community comes through events like this, or the Howard County Executive's Office has done some events. We attend some statewide events like, Meet the Primes.
So you partner with other organizations.
Yeah, exactly. We don't, especially the procurement office itself at Howard Community College doesn't really have the bandwidth to take this on. It's a staff of 3, and our purchasing is decentralized. So a lot of the interfacing with the vendor community actually comes through our end users. They're the ones who know what it is they want to be purchasing, are familiar with the vendors in the spaces. So a lot of the outreach is done on that end. So for instance, our facilities folks are the ones who are, calling local vendors when they're looking for a quote on, say, like, some new lawn equipment or something like that.
And Doug?
We're in the same situation, Tom, is, we're thankful that Dean reaches out to us to participate in his different events that, we say, yeah, sign us up. Quite frankly, it's a resource issue. We don't have massive budget. Not that Dean has a massive budget, but we don't have big budgets or the resources to do the coordination that's involved. So we greatly appreciate the opportunities to piggyback. In terms of local, though, on the educational side, we do have a career technology program that does reach out to a lot of the local businesses, and we partner with a lot of our local businesses on the educational side. While we don't necessarily do a tremendous amount of business with them in that sense, there's great partnerships that take place out there within Howard County that we're all I think, very proud of.
Okay. Now, I want to focus on the small procurement. Those sometimes go under the radar. Oftentimes, vendors are always looking for these large $1 million projects. And I know that from my experience working in both the state as well as in the local government sector and in the private, in the nonprofit sector, there are companies that think they can do everything. And they will have a listing of NAICS codes that says they do X, Y, Z, but they can't do everything. And so is there a pre-qualification requirement for vendors who complete the vendor database? And when you're looking to identify capable vendors for even small procurement opportunities, how is that process handled? And we're going to the government again.
Okay, so when we build our database of local registered businesses, primarily we just verify that they are a county-based business. I mean, we will, do a Google search and make sure that if they say they supply green widgets or purple widgets, that's what they supply. But we don't dig too deep into it. And then when we contact them for a quote, if they say, oh, we don't really quote that, well, that's kind of a red flag there that they're not prime in whatever that good or service that we just asked them to provide.
I'm going to Dominic for the community college.
Sure. So as I noted before, we don't really have a vendor database, but that kind of vetting process is really handled by our end users. So if someone is looking for a particular item and they're reaching out to vendors, it's kind of all happening at once where they're getting the quotes. Our quote threshold for small procurement is $10,000. So anything under 10,000, they're really anything under 50, because 50,000 is our small procurement threshold before we have to do a solicitation. 10,000 is the threshold for only getting one quote. I digress. The end users are the ones who are kind of vetting the vendors. They're the ones who know what it is they're looking for. They're familiar with their scope of work and their requirements. So they are the ones who are ensuring that the vendors they contact can actually provide the services or the goods that are needed.
Okay. And Doug, with the public school system?
In a very similar vein, most of the small purchases do occur in our maintenance area more than anything. The classroom teachers, we provide, enterprise-wise, pretty much everything that they need. So most of the purchasing is done through our maintenance, through, supplies and materials. And it's the same, very similar situation. We have a robust P-card program that takes purchases from 0 up to 5,000. Over 5,000, we do small procurements, want 3 quotes, and that takes 5 to 25. And again, it really boils down to, quite frankly, a strong Google web presence. We're out there looking for something. Generally, it's it's the former yellow book page, kind of like shopping. If there's anything new or unique that we need, or we do go to the locals that have provided good service before, and they earn the repeat service. So that's kind of how the pattern is set up.
So since we're talking about services and vendors that you've used currently, are there any situations where you've used a vendor and the quality of service was not up to your standard? And if that is the case, how was that handled? And again, I'm going to the government, so that would be Dean.
Sure, thanks, Sharon. It's pretty rare that something like that happens. Usually it's addressed out in the field. For instance, if it's a capital project, they're working on a large building. If there's any frustrations with the prime vendor or with the subcontractor, usually it's our project managers out there addressing it in the field. We encourage agencies to reach out to us if it's something ongoing, something that they cannot resolve themselves. We'll invite the vendor in. We have a cure meeting with them. We give them a time period to cure any deficiencies that they presented. 99% of the time it works out. Sometimes it's just a misunderstanding between the user agency and the vendor. And it's like, oh, okay, I didn't understand that. And we get it resolved.
Okay, so in essence, if there's a misunderstanding in the scope of work, then you will bring them in or have a conversation with them for clarity so that everybody's on the same page. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes.
And Dominic, I'm going to go to you and then I'll go to Doug, but then I have a follow-up question as it relates to protests. Okay. Go ahead, Dominic.
So, I mean, really, I would just echo pretty much everything Dean said. I would say that that applies to us as well. Any differences between what is expected based on the scope of work and what's actually delivered by a vendor is typically handled at the end user or project manager level, such as for large projects, construction and things like that. They are typically able to handle it on their end and usually loop in the procurement office just so we're aware of what's going on. On the rare occasions that it does rise to the level of a true disagreement, where it's not just a misunderstanding, but a disagreement between college staff and the vendor, then procurement does get more directly involved and typically will try and foster conversations between the vendor and the end user department. And if necessary, and this happens very rarely, but every now and then we may be called upon to terminate the relationship, and then this handles that portion of things.
Okay, and Doug?
Too often, but
on a formal basis, we've implemented what we call a performance scorecard, where we actually include in the solicitation criteria of, I think, about 23 items that we kind of, I guess, inform the bidder community that these are our priority. These are important for us. And we try to, use that as a feedback tool, as a mechanism to, keep them on track. We see our role as basically trying to ensure fairness, if you will, in terms of the evaluation. As Dean alluded to, 99% of the time, it's just flat out communication. Somebody didn't understand or didn't communicate clearly what the expectations were. And it's a matter of just bringing the parties together and saying, okay, folks, what did you say? What did you say? What did we mean? What did we want? And we end up getting it resolved. And that's the goal. That's how we want to approach it. But the scorecard serves as an upfront kind of indicator for them. We have a demanding board, demanding public and expectations, and we want to make sure that it's again clearly communicated up front that if you start as they say stubbing your toe, we're going to notify you, and we want to make sure we ensure a fair due process in that review part of it.
Okay. In my role working in the governor's office of minority affairs, I had the distinct pleasure of working with all 24 LEAs in the state of Maryland. And one of the requirements was to assess how they were performing with MBEs overall. Oftentimes I would get calls from vendors indicating that they didn't get paid, but the prime contractor got paid. So my question to all three of you, what is the process for a vendor who has gotten paid by a prime contractor who's gotten paid by the agency or your organization, and they had subs that they had on their project and they haven't gotten paid? What is the first line of recourse for the government, for the community college, and for the school system? And I'll go with the government.
Okay. So for the government, anytime we have a capital project, we always require payment and performance bonds. If a situation like that happens, and I can think of one or two instances where that has happened, where we paid the prime, subcontractor calls us and says, hey, the prime's not paying us. We first give them all the payment information, or the information on the payment bond. They can then contact the surety company. We will also reach out to the prime, ask them what's going on. Same thing. Is it a misunderstanding? Did you not receive the invoice? And typically we always get those resolved. I mean, it kind of, it's very rare that happens. Like I said, one or two times in all the years that I've been here.
Okay. All right. What about you, Dominic?
we also require payment and performance bonds for our capital projects. This isn't something that I've had to deal with so far in my time there. When I came on board, we were finishing up a capital project that I didn't have a direct hand in. And the capital project that I've been working with our facilities folks now our new math and athletics building hasn't really gotten underway yet. So knock on wood, hopefully this doesn't pop up. But again, we have the bonds, and I imagine we'd follow a similar process to what Dean mentioned, certainly speaking to Prime, finding out what's going on and starting a conversation between them and the subcontractor to find out where the disconnect was.
Okay. And Doug?
Well, Sharon, as you know, the state has a very robust MBE program.
Yes, it does.
And we like to think we're pretty successful with it. And to that end, one of the things that they've put in place recently is, the quarterly reports now that we provide. Yes. And again, with the state's program, they've put a little bit of teeth behind it now. So first of all, there are liquidated damages.
Yes.
Prime does not, fulfill their obligation on the MBE side. And we have had to enforce those. And we make the contractors, the primes, aware that we will enforce those. To that end, what we do is on that quarterly basis, we monitor those payments as desired by the state. So we start to get a sense of if a prime is not seeing or not reflecting those payments to the sub the way they had committed to at the onset of the project. We basically will send out little flags through our CM because all of our capital projects are generally done through a construction manager agent. And they rattle the cages a little bit and get things rolling. So we'd like to think that we're reasonably successful in making sure our subs get paid through that process. We do run into problems where there are, again, miscommunications, change orders come into play, retainage comes into play. And they have been, points of contention over the years. But for the most part, we respect our primes and we try to make sure that our primes are taken care of and they get paid as promptly as possible. So on that end, I'd like to think we're successful. We have, as I said, have had hiccups, but we've worked through those and again, maintain our projects being on time and on budget.
Good. The theme of these seminars for today is resiliency. So I just want to ask all three of you, because we're in the time of COVID, everybody has to adapt, pivot, do whatever we have to do to get the job done. In your respective offices, I know that there's been a lot of changes for everyone, even in the purchasing environment. How has COVID impacted the way you all do business? And what lessons have you learned from COVID that you will take forward as lessons learned that are positive? And I'll start with the government.
Sure, give the other two time to think about the question. Like I said earlier, things have really changed. So fortunately, not to go back on this, but with our e-procurement system, we're able to continue with our solicitations. All of the bids come in electronically. We have not started with requests for proposals in our e-procurement system because it's a whole separate module, but we've made it work. We set up a whole system where vendors will come in the morning of the day of opening and drop them off, and we have social distancing. We set up multiple desks so we don't get a bottleneck of people or vendors waiting in line to drop off their proposals. And of course they can still send them in by UPS or FedEx or whatever. So we've adjusted there. It hasn't slowed down our solicitations. In the beginning, it slowed down meetings with vendors, but that's now picked back up. Probably 3 times a week, I'm meeting with vendors through Zoom or WebEx. Meetings with my staff. Before this whole pandemic hit, my staff was always asking me, hey, could we try out teleworking? I was really hesitant with that because you think people are not going to be as productive. I was completely wrong. I find my staff are much more productive teleworking from home.
It's that flexibility.
Exactly. They're getting things done. You don't have those constant interruptions. I find that about myself as well. I mean, I enjoy being, being this productive.
So do you see, once COVID is over, do you see the government going back to business as usual, or will you adapt to what you've learned from COVID-19 in terms of business opportunities and the way you're doing business now?
It's going to be a hybrid system, really. I think that when we eventually get back to the office, we're going to send staff in smaller levels of staff on a rotating basis. As ones that are not in the office will just continue working from home, and then maybe the next week they'll rotate. Hopefully one day we'll all be back in the office and this will be far behind us. I'm looking forward to that. I'm sure like everybody else is.
Yeah. What about you, Dominic?
So similarly, obviously moving everything to telework was a pretty big change for everyone. Thankfully, the procurement office, the way that we operate, it was a pretty easy transition for us. And my staff, myself included, were already teleworking 1 or 2 days a week. So relatively easy transition. One of the biggest challenges certainly was how to handle solicitations. So we, in the past, had always received physical submissions of solicitations, and we have actually since transitioned to entirely electronic submissions. So we don't even get them mailed in at all anymore.
Do you find that to be more efficient?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's much more efficient, much less waste. We're not, before we'd be requesting, 5, 6, 7, 8 copies of proposals so I could hand them out to all of our evaluators. And now I just get a document that I can send out to the appropriate parties.
And there's a cost savings and a confirmation all in one.
Yep, absolutely. So that's been great. And that's certainly something that I see us carrying forward, especially with the solution that we found is pretty cheap. So I don't really see a reason to go back to forcing vendors to respond with physical responses anymore.
Have you put a lot of your information online as it relates to COVID-19, or was it already there?
It was mostly already there. We were already, in terms of solicitations, we were already posting all of those solicitation docs on our website and advertising it on Emma.
All right. Okay, Doug?
A very interesting question. And I say it because I think on a certain level, I think many are in, I won't use the term denial, but, reactionary mode. We're trying to respond to what we all hope is a fairly temporary thing. And that was 3 months ago.
Yes.
So now we are, 6, 7, 8 months into it now, and we're all scratching our heads like, is this the new COVID, world we're in?
Yes.
And I think and Dean and Dom did, I'm right there with them in terms of where we are. But I think what the next step on that might be that as we maybe step back into the more normal of business, the more interactive type, like the pre-submission meetings and pre-construction meetings and things like that will be on a more personal level. But I think what might serve us well is to do a bit of a survey to reach out to folks and say, did you find this more efficient? Did you, the electronic submissions definitely, as Dom said, it's a lifesaver. Instead of getting 3 binders worth of response, it's all condensed now into a single electronic version, which can be then shared to the review committee and everything else. So there's points of that might stay. But I think I'd like to kind of get a sense from both our customers, meaning the folks that we're doing the bids for, as well as the folks that are submitting bids to us. And it might be, Dean, a great training, outreach effort for you.
Getting the pulse of what's going on, hearing directly from the vendors and the community that you're serving. It would be interesting to know how they have adapted to the changes going electronic as opposed to coming in to in-person sessions. I would think that there are so many meetings that's always taking place that we have to drive 30 plus minutes or more. And if we can continue to do it virtually, you're still getting the same participation, but people don't have to get in their car and drive. I think that's a cost savings, and it gives you the opportunity not to be so stressed and to focus more on what's more important. Do you have to drive 30 minutes to a meeting that you can pick up the telephone and do and get the same results? So
what I marvel at is the skill set piece.
Yes.
Quite frankly, I mean, I'm sure many of us have dabbled a little bit with WebEx and maybe a little with Zoom. Well, now Zoom and for us, Google Meets and Microsoft Teams, I mean, they're the norm. And now we can tool around, we can chat, we can raise our hand, we can do all these things that, we've all kind of had to learn on the fly.
One of the things that I heard when I was in government about business owners who were startup businesses, you need to have a banking account, you need to have an attorney, you need to have someone who will give you the guidance that you need so you can go forward. And you definitely need to have a website. Well, this takes it to the next level because everybody's doing everything virtually. And if you're not connected, then you're gonna miss out.
Right.
This has been very, very interesting and very interactive. I like the fact that, everybody's answer wasn't cookie cutter. I didn't expect that to be cookie cutter. And I like the fact that you all have a proactive approach to how you're dealing with your vendors, even in a time of COVID, and the lessons that you've learned as a result of that. I think that the vendors who are looking to do business in any of these or all three of your agencies will do themselves well to realize that there is ample opportunity to do business in these markets, realizing that you buy everything from soups to nuts, everything from building supplies to pencils and papers and etc. And people just need to understand how to navigate to get to that place of doing business, whether it's a small procurement or something to $100,000 or beyond. But I appreciate the opportunity to have this candid conversation over Zoom to get you all to give us an update on what's going on in your virtual worlds. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sharon.
Thank you.
And Sharon, I want to thank the team, you and the rest of the guys as well for doing a great job in presenting and so forth. A lot of information that was covered, a lot of ground covered and information disseminated over this last 35, 40 minutes. And so again, thank you.
Thank you.
Also, this will wrap up our 3-part series. And so hopefully for those of you that have been able to participate and watch over the last 3 weeks, you found it beneficial and good for your continued growth and development as business owners, business representatives. Larry, anything you'd like to add from EDA's perspective?
I just want to say, thanks to all the panelists that, were able to share, just some great information, not only today, but throughout this entire series, and the team that really put the program together. A lot of hours went into, finding the right folks to deliver the content. So just, thanks for the engagement, and hope, we get to do this again next year as we continue to serve our small business community.
Excellent. And also want to thank KCI for their support, as well as also our other sponsors and Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated, as well as also the African American Community Roundtable of Howard County. And so, and Kim, I see your note here, and I will send you a note offline with that information. And so, again, thank you all, and that will wrap us up for today. Have a great rest of your day.
You too. Thank you, everyone. Stay safe.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.